André Rieu has been the beating heart of a kinder world for decades, the living echo of waltzes that restored joy to even the lonely and mended wounded hearts. His violin, delicate, gentle, and timeless, has floated through the years like a silver thread of light. At one point, he brought millions of people to tears under Maastricht stars, when tears and laughter blended into a single tune. However, behind the elegant bow and that recognizable smile is a guy who has fought the most important struggle of his life, the struggle for equilibrium itself. Once, the stage he loved became an uncontrollable storm due to a concealed sickness that stole the ground beneath his feet. Since then, every performance has been a silent battle against fatigue, lightheadedness, and the eerie worry that one misstep could put an end to the music forever. Keep your eyes on him, since what he is going through right now might be the most delicate moments of his life. If his music has ever made you feel better when things were tough, please leave a like below as a silent homage to the musician who transformed suffering into melody and silence into love. Some hearts have fissures that are too big for childhood to patch. On October 1, 1949, André Leon Marie Nicolola Rieu was born in Maastricht, a sleepy Dutch city that still bears the subtle scars of post-war Europe. Church bells that attempted to silence the ghosts and cobblestones that evoked memories of marching boots. Although his family was well respected, well off, and never impoverished, the atmosphere in their house was less breathable than love. Even though his father, André Rieu Sr., was a renowned conductor who could command an orchestra to thunder, his own son never showed him any affection. His mother, Katharina, operated their house like a score, airless, precise, and clean. It was discipline, not tenderness, that characterized the Rieu household. Except for the human heart, everything was in order. André would later remember, he subsequently remarked, "I learned early that approval is never warmer than love, but it can be louder than love." When he first picked up a violin at age 6, it felt much too large for his tiny hands. It was hunger, not fear, that made the bow tremble. Desire for sound, warmth, and a life that seems alive. On some evenings, the cold made his fingertips sting. But since the only evidence he could still sense was pain, he continued. After supper, his father's footsteps would fade down the corridor, and the house would become quiet. André would play to the darkness in that silence, a timid youngster attempting to use wood and strings to find solace. It was more than practice. It was a matter of... His independence was born out of that wound. He had changed from being a son pleading for acceptance. He was an artist creating a space for love to flourish. "I don't know if forgiveness is the right word," he responded with a sorrowful smile when asked if he had ever forgiven his parents decades later. Those early concerts in small halls and town squares became the purest expression of who he was. "I just learned to play through the silence." He wasn't acting. He was recovering. Every note was a tiny act of rebellion against the icy world he had been raised in. He added, "I chose to create warmth, but I wasn't born in it." By turning rejection into beauty, quiet into connection, and a shattered upbringing into a legacy that would one day make the entire world dance, André Rieu started to reinvent what classical music could mean. After years of heartache, tiredness, and rejection, André Rieu was on the verge of making the riskiest decision of his life by 1987. He was going to start over at the age of 38, when most guys were slowing down. His hands, the same hands that shook in the quiet of childhood, now carried a dream that was strong enough to alter everything, but brittle enough to shatter. Many people criticized him for being risky when he chose to start the Johann Strauss Orchestra with just 12 players. He was written off as a romantic dreamer pursuing a delusion by the sneering classical elite. They muttered, "He's trying to make classical music smile." André's ambition, however, remained unwavering. His goal was to liberate music from the icy marble of history so that it could once again breathe, laugh, and embrace people. He would later remember with a tired smile, "They said I was mad. However, I would rather die happy than flawless." Far from the glitz that viewers today witness, the early years were arduous. Like hesitant applause, money came in. Not enough to sleep, not nearly enough to go on. Each performance was a risk. Each tour is an endurance challenge. He put all of his energy into surviving, selling, taking out a loan, paying it back, and beginning afresh. On some evenings, he performed on stages so frigid that his fingers went numb in the middle of his performance. He would forego meals on some nights in order to pay his musicians first. His body started to object. Despite experiencing vertigo episodes, shaking hands, and an incessant ringing in his ears from countless rehearsals, he persisted. He claimed that there were times when the floor seemed to vanish and the lights flashed before my eyes. But I stood because of the music. He performed in their first significant concert on January 1988. One shaky hope, 12 musicians. The clapping was deafening, and the performance was amazing. But after the lights went down, he sat backstage, shaking, his pulse pounding. The numbers hardly worked in some months. His crew depended on him for both art and income, and instruments needed to be repaired. Travel expenses also increased. After performances, he would stroll through icy streets with his coat drawn tight, thinking to himself, "One more miracle, one more concert." He once counted pennies by lamplight in a tiny hotel room till morning, looking wan and hollow in the window. During his first performance, fatigue occasionally caused him to lose his vision, yet his bow never wavered. Yes, it shook, but it didn't shatter. "Let it be on stage, at least I'll have fallen in music," he once told himself if he fell. Sweat and tears blended together under the stage lights. Like a lifeline pulled against gravity, his bow glistened. The audience cheered for daring rather than perfection when he grinned through the fuzz. Decades later, André looks back on those years as revelations rather than struggles. In his 70s, he said, "I don't remember the debts. I can still picture the smiles on their faces when I was playing. I knew it was worth every bruise because of this." The seeds bloomed slowly and painfully. City after city, the ideal that had seemed unattainable started to sing back to him, and laughter took the place of uncertainty. The imbalance that would eventually almost ruin his career had already started, even though he was unaware of it at the time. He continued to play because, to him, happiness was never the absence of pain, it was what made it through. Once hollow, the applause now sounded like life itself. Not evidence of celebrity, but that even the tired may inspire others. His music would never bow down, even if his body faltered. André Rieu's unwavering perseverance started to pay off by the mid-1990s, but not in the easy, glamorous way that some people picture when they hear the term global fame. Sleepless years, personal debt, and the silent pain of a man with too many dreams on one pair of shoulders shaped his rise. The pivotal moment occurred in 1995 when, during a UEFA Champions League game, he performed Shostakovich's Waltz No. 2, causing a stadium full of tens of thousands to become silent in shock before erupting into an almost biblical roar of ovation. Throughout the night, his music swept between continents. However, the world was blind to the weariness concealed behind the grin. After nights when he hardly slept, plagued by logistics, ticket sales, and the worry that his orchestra may fail due to its own desire, he gave that one performance, which turned him into a star. He subsequently claimed, "That night changed my life. However, it also signaled the start of my biggest challenge to maintain that flame without burning myself." From that point on, Rieu's life was a haze of stages. Yes, the tours were spectacular, but they concealed an empire that engulfed him. He was more than just a painter. He was the financier, the producer, and the guardian of over 100 lives. The burden of responsibility felt oppressive. He performed every night as if there were no responsibilities while handling marketing, insurance, payrolls, travel, and rehearsals. He did not wear a crown that read King of Waltz. He was carrying a burden. On stage, every bowstroke was a compromise with exhaustion. On some evenings, the music notes floated like ghosts in the glare of stage lights as his vision became blurry due to weariness. He still grinned. He continued to play, nevertheless. He acknowledged that there were occasions when I bowed and my arms were scarcely perceptible, but the crowd restored my power. Rieu had established an autonomous musical empire by the early 2000s, something that very few musicians in history have ever accomplished. He oversaw every aspect, including logistics, promotion, and recording. In his hometown of Maastricht, he constructed his own recording studio so he could have complete control over every sound. Every choice was a risk. Some nearly wrecked him, while others paid off magnificently. His productions became enormous in scope. Tens of thousands of tickets per tour, hundreds of employees, and millions in logistics. He almost went bankrupt in 2009 due to unforeseen cancellations and medical exhaustion. In a matter of months, over $15 million disappeared. But his faith remained strong despite the decline in the numbers. Later, he said, "I wasn't sleeping. I was figuring out how to save everyone who was dependent on me, not how much money I could make." His resolve turned into both his illness and its remedy. Nevertheless, André never sacrificed the core of his vision, even in the midst of chaos. His assets revealed a man who built for protection rather than prosperity. His employees, instruments, and songs were all kept in dozens of properties in Maastricht alone. His fleet of trucks transported outfits and precious violins across international borders. To keep his musicians healthy, his chefs prepared meals. He even constructed a nursery for his performers' kids. Not every choice or euro spent was a luxury. It was labor masquerading as love. "My orchestra is my family," he once remarked. He was all sparkle to the world. And you don't abandon family. Gowns, chandeliers, and laughter under the stars. However, behind the scenes were the taxing rehearsals, the frail body battling fatigue and aging, and the never-ending risky ledgers. Though it was based on silent endurance and restless nights, his smile was genuine. André Rieu was extremely wealthy at the time he took on the world stage. One of the most lucrative independent music empires in history, with over 80 properties and an estimated net worth of $600 million. But to him, survival, rather than wealth, was the true victory. He whispered, "People see the beauty, but not the pain behind it. Both make me proud." He discovered that excellence does not equate to lack of hardship. It is its symphony. Now, every note he plays echoes the realization that beneath every glittering waltz, there is a heartbeat that has experienced faith, exhaustion, and failure. Even if his physical condition has deteriorated over time, his music has not. Evidence that the spirit can dance even when the body trembles. None of André Rieu's many things have the same vitality, memory, and fragility as his two Stradivarius violins and his castle. They are considered possessions by most. For him, they are representations of the spirit and body that sustained his music over many years of rebirth and fatigue. There was more to Maastricht's 15th century castle than just stone and grandeur. It was there that he first sat at a piano as a weak youngster and discovered the healing power of sound. It was a sign of survival rather than pride when he eventually purchased it in 1999, following decades of touring and exhaustion. He once remarked, "I wanted a place where my heart could rest while the world continued to spin." Restoring the castle turned into a therapeutic exercise. He was reconstructing himself, brick by brick. The castle evolved into more than just a house. Each hallway he illuminated and each garden he restored seemed to whisper, "You are still here." It developed into a live being. The coldness of hotel rooms was replaced by the sunlight-filled glass conservatory. When his lungs grew tired from all the flights and practices, the tropical garden provided some fresh air. He constructed a recording studio inside its walls as a haven as well as a place to work. He would withdraw there, bow in hand, allowing music to flow through him like medication on days when his strength and balance failed. He once thought that it's odd how stillness can simultaneously heal and harm you. When his body failed to bring him back to rhythm, the silence of the castle did. His two Stradivarius violins, one from 1667 and the other from 1732, were equally revered. Centuries' worth of fingerprints were visible in their wood. The ghost of history was in their tone. They were extensions of Rieu's own heartbeat rather than instruments. "I feel time breathing when I hold them," he added. Even still, he was burdened by these possessions. The burden of responsibility almost brought him down during the gloomy months of the 2020 epidemic, when everything came to a halt and quiet descended like ash. The concerts stopped. Revenue stopped. He was still required by his family and orchestra, though. To cover their salaries, he thought about selling one of the Stradivarius violins. Just thinking about that broke him. He subsequently acknowledged that it was. Even in solitude, the music persisted for some reason. The castle and violins are seen by outsiders as symbols of luxury. André Rieu sees them as evidence of perseverance, of a body and spirit that did not give up. When his lungs weaken, his music continues to breathe in the castle. When his hands shake, his heart still sings on the strings. They are his anatomy, all together, his living pulse transformed into sound. They remind me that even the finest instruments, like the human heart, must be tuned repeatedly if you want them to continue singing. He adds with a smile when people ask him what they mean. André Rieu reached a level of stillness in 2020 that no stage could have prepared him for. A hush so great and so cruel that it seemed to obliterate his heartbeat itself. His days had been a hallowed beat for decades. Practice, tour, applause, repeat. Every bowstroke and tone had contributed to the great, inexorable symphony of life. The music ceased in what seemed like a single, brutal, silent moment. Like a hurricane that spared no stage, the epidemic raced over continents. All of his concerts disappeared from his schedule. Every hall's lights went out. The man whose violin had previously filled stadiums and cathedrals now stood in an echo-free world. The eerie silence of empty rooms took the place of the cheers that had been his lifeblood for 50 years. This new silence felt almost surgical to a guy who had before endured loneliness, bereavement, and tiredness. Quieter, it cut deeper, but he wasn't thinking about himself at first. It was of the 100 people who relied on him for their livelihoods. The tailor, drivers, technicians, and musicians who had made his music their livelihood. Determining that not a single one of them would be left to drift, André dug into the reserves he had spent a lifetime creating while borders closed and ticket sales crashed. His accounts dwindled month after month as the globe fell silent. At night, the numbers taunted him, red ink lines that faded behind weary eyes. He made silent, never-spoken sacrifices by selling minor remnants of his past, including a cherished antique car and a portion of an old investment. And as the silence deepened, he saw that he was standing in front of his 1732 Stradivarius, his most treasured friend. It had sang with him through pain and victory for decades. It was unimaginable to sell it, but he did. "Maybe it's time," he muttered once, "if it would rescue them." The fact that he could think of it spoke more than words could, but he never sold it. He was losing money, not wealth. Piece by piece, it was breath. The air became silent within his castle, which had previously been alive with singing and joy. There was no damage to the recording studio. Corridors that had once reverberated with music now murmured only with remembrance, and violins rested in their cases. He strolled along those corridors by himself, following the contours of the life he had created, listening to the ghosts of melodies past in every quiet. The world shuddered in terror outside. The man who once made millions dance, André Rieu, had to confront his own frailty inside. In that solitude, he started writing again. He later remarked quietly, "When you are forced to stop, you understand what music truly means. Every note becomes a gift, every silence a lesson. Deeper, slower music that hurts with thankfulness." No longer were the notes performances, they were supplications. His bow shook with humility rather than weariness, the understanding that music and life can both disappear in an instant. After more than a year, it seemed sacrosanct when the globe reopened, and he took the stage once more. The cheers that greeted him were gentle rather than booming, the collective exhalation of 1,000 hearts. Some sobbed in public, their personal sorrows mirrored in his facial expressions. The echo of the protracted silence was present in every waltz that evening. The grins were more brittle, the crescendos weaker. A whisper of survival in every bow and stroke. Under the lights, there was a guy who had been reborn, not merely the king of waltz, one who had experienced loneliness, terror, and the silent breakdown of all he held dear, and discovered that music still has life even when it is silenced. He also does. The most agonizing stillness a musician can experience comes from within himself, not from the audience. The most agonizing stillness a musician can experience comes from within himself, not from the audience. After decades of restless flights and never-ending tours that blended together, André Rieu faced a storm in 2010 that no amount of adulation could quell. The earth beneath him became a moving sea as a nasty virus infiltrated his inner ear and stole his equilibrium like a robber in the night. After a lifetime of leading orchestras, the guy now struggled to lead his own limbs. One by one, concerts that had been planned for months vanished. Fans who were devastated wrote from all over the world. Their prayers were piled high in their letters. Like faded flowers, their messages of optimism were sandwiched between pages. The King of Waltz, however, was reduced behind the curtain to a shaky figure clutching his own house's walls in order to remain upright. Vertigo, nausea, and dizziness. Every day is a haze of recalcitrant breathing and spinning walls. The forced silence, a sort of living silence, was agony for a guy who was defined by activity. Dawns extended into nights. The beat of his footsteps reverberated through the halls like a metronome counting time against despair as he paced the dim hallways of his home, bow in hand, whispering, "I must come back. They need me." At times, his own reflection wavered in the window glass, and the room appeared to tilt beneath him. But he was unyielding. He discovered during those restless hours that healing was an act of endurance, one shaky breath at a time, rather than a miracle. In the years that followed, there was healing as well as a heartbreak that no medication could ease. Just as his body was regaining equilibrium, in 2016 fate took a different turn. His closest buddy and trombonist, Ruud Merckx, unexpectedly passed out in the middle of a tour. Their tiny dressing room was filled with laughing one day. Silence came next. As usual, André took the stage that evening, but the music shook with absence. The lights blazed colder, and the applause sounded hollow. Every waltz turned into an elegy, every note into an appeal to heaven. Later, as his voice cracked under the memory, he admitted that it was like losing a limb. There was a single bar of silence before he took the stage. Never revealed, never justified, but always impolite. He kept his companion alive in that delicate interlude between notes. He lost his rhythm, love his endurance, and pain became his prayer. Decades of overcoming fatigue and gravity had taken their toll by 2024. 40,000 hearts waited outside the curtain in Mexico, under a burning sky. He lifted his bow, prepared to offer them everything once more. Then the earth began to tilt. The floor raced up to greet him, a hollow ringing in his ears and a flash of light. The crowd's clamor faded into a far-off hum. The stage crew let out a shout. With their flashlights piercing the stage's gold haze, paramedics rushed into the wings. As they hoisted him onto a stretcher, the warm warmth of the concert changed to sterile white. The world shrank to the sound of heart monitors and Marjorie's quivering voice next to him as his breathing became shallow. He said, "I don't ever want another opening night like this." His eyes hazy under the glare. He lay still that night in a dimly lit hotel room, the silence weighing heavily on his chest. Dozens of texts flashed on the bedside table phone. Unanswered, family, friends, and fans. He wondered if the curtain had fallen permanently as he gazed at the ceiling and counted the steady cadence of his own pulse. He decided to rise with the lovely light of dawn as it eventually broke through the window. This time, recovery was hard. His physicians cautioned him. The body heals a little more slowly each year. But he retaliated, inch by inch. He honed his will to survive the whirling environment, his hands to steady and his legs to stand. On some days, he practiced for just a few minutes before feeling lightheaded again. For others, he would force himself to cry in just to complete a single sentence. After that, every performance turned into a negotiation with suffering. With time, each bow stroke is a silent battle. He used to mutter, "Help me stand, old friend," as he looked at the empty spot where Rude used to stand before every concert. His practices became more gentle, and his tours became shorter, but the fire inside him never went out. He discovered that breath was a better indicator of success than ticket revenue. Just being able to play is a miracle. Few people ever learn what he now knew, that even when the body falters, the spirit continues to sing. His waltzes became more human, gentler, and slower, not in defiance, but in defiance. Every bow stroke had a heartbeat-like pulse. Every cheer was like oxygen filling tired lungs again. He finally realized that the most authentic music he had ever composed was not about strings or fame, but rather about survival itself. As he stood under the lights once more, his hands shaking as he steadied the violin. For over 50 years, Marjorie has been the calm behind the curtain, the silent architect of the empire, and the unwavering pillar of André Rieu's remarkable life. She was the lifeblood that kept the world going as waltzes and brilliant lights glittered around it. When exhaustion and fear got too close, the music sprang alive. With the precision of love masquerading as responsibility, she oversaw every schedule, every excursion, and every delicate minute of his health. Long after midnight, she was the one who balanced ledgers, negotiated contracts, and rewrote agreements. Protecting the man whose heart beats in time with his violin is more important than glory. She remained steadfast, despite decades of restless flights, financial turbulence, and the eerie silence of the pandemic. "Marjorie saved my life more times than music ever did," André once said in a low voice. Their kid, Pierre, grew up backstage dozing off to the sound of tuning strings and the soft murmur of rehearsals. "She believed when I couldn't." He was taught at a young age that greatness is not glamour but grit. He is now the watchful defender of his father's legacy, coordinating every aspect, the lighting, the tempo, even the rest periods, to safeguard the body that once supported entire symphonies. He has witnessed things that no audience ever gets to see. Pierre once remarked, "That's when my real job begins, making sure my father wakes up to another sunrise strong enough to play." André's granddaughter Daisy, whose tiny fingers dance across piano keys with the same quiet wonder that once lived in his 6-year-old hands, is another example of this. André's bow hand trembles after a 2-hour concert, and his triumphant smile belies a slow descent of exhaustion. She is the embodiment of the family's philosophy: we never force them. If music chooses them, they will come. Daisy is more than just a child to André, who once remarked, "It's as if the music has found a new body to live in." As he watched her play, her laughter fills the halls where once there was only discipline. André Rieu lives in his 150-year-old house, close to his beloved 15th-century castle, where a boy once reached for a piano key and discovered his destiny. The castle is still alive with music, its stone walls softened by memory, but his house has become his haven, a place where silence soothes rather than frightens. This is November 2025. His days now have a slower rhythm. He takes walks in the misty gardens at dawn, stretches lightly under the guidance of his trainer, drinks herbal teas rather than champagne, and eats meals that are carefully balanced by his chef and doctor to maintain the fragile stamina that age and history have claimed. In the afternoons, he withdraws to his studio. Evenings are for Marjorie, Pierre, and Daisy. Quiet dinners, gentle laughter, and the solace of being surrounded by love rather than applause. He hasn't publicly discussed a will, but his family already knows what his true inheritance will be. Sometimes he plays for hours. Sometimes he just touches the violin as if conversing with an old friend. His net worth may be measured in hundreds of millions, but it is not his enormous wealth, the castle, or the precious Stradivarius violins. Rather, it is his life itself. The bravery to provide warmth where none was provided, the discipline to maintain faith when the body faltered, and the fortitude to continue playing when silence threatened to engulf everything. The echoes of his July 2025 concerts still reverberate in the air, a symphony of survival and thankfulness. Thousands of people stood together that night under the summer sky, tears sparkling in the crowd as the last note faded into the stars. However, his true wealth lies in the millions of hearts that beat a little more steadily when they hear his waltzes. In early November 2025, André plays fewer notes, but each one carries the weight of a lifetime. His health, though more fragile, is no longer an enemy but a teacher. Every breath he takes, every bow he raises, is a silent defiance of time. "I am still here," he whispered backstage afterward, "and so is the music." Because in the end, André Rieu's true legacy is not measured in accolades or applause, but in the unseen lives he has lifted. The widower who smiled again, the lonely who felt less alone, the elderly who found the courage to continue dancing. He knows the curtain will fall someday, but not just yet. Not while his heart is still beating in waltz time. Even a single word of gratitude is a note in André's eternal symphony. His life serves as a reminder that the truest music is not what we hear, but what we feel. The will to keep breathing, to keep loving, to keep believing in beauty, no matter how heavy the years become. If André's melodies have ever brought you back to joy or carried you through grief, leave your tribute below. And as you listen tonight, keep this in mind. No matter where you are or how exhausted your heart is, you still have music inside of you. May you live your own waltz in peace, health, and the peaceful prosperity of a life well loved.